All right, welcome back to this week's Marshield Outdoors Podcast. I appreciate everybody tuning in and continue to follow along. Continue looking at Final Draw TV. They're on the Sportsman channel now, 52 weeks, so you can catch them every week of the year. Also look for a lot of their other content on their YouTube channel. They got some great stuff out, turkey stuff coming up, some really great hunts lined up for this year that I'm sure they'll be sharing. So check them out, and we appreciate their support for the podcast. But tonight, I have a really special guest. I've obviously used the products for a long time. A lot of us probably have. But Doug Roberts with Conquest Scents, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on, Chad.
Yes, sir. Thanks for joining me. I started the podcast probably, I guess, a little over a year now. So this will probably be episode 69 or 70 that we're doing tonight, that we're recording. I never had a thought of doing a podcast, never had listened to a podcast before I started this. But I thought it was a great way to network. I thought it was a great way to kind of get in the mix of the hunting community, the hunting industry outside of, what I know here in Virginia. And all of a sudden it's done kind of picked up, and now it's become a weekly thing, which my wife really enjoys besides me being in the woods. But it's been neat, Doug. And I know, as we go through the episode tonight, you've had a lot of different, probably changes in life that's led you to the course you're at now. And obviously you're very successful at it. And, I've watched some of your shows and stuff from Conquest 200, stuff like that. So it's really neat coming from an agricultural background and a cattle background, also seeing how deer farming works, which we're going to go into.
Right.
So, well, Doug, I just want to start with you and kind of give us a little bit of background about where you grew up and just kind of where that spark for the outdoor lifestyle began. I think that'd be really neat to uncover.
Okay. Well, I grew up actually on a small 40-acre farm in Allendale, Michigan, which is on the west side of the state, about 20 minutes from Lake Michigan. If you now kind of know it, it's about 6 miles from Grand Valley State University campus.
Okay.
Very, very small town, Class D school. We had 74 kids in our whole high school class, okay? But at the same time, we were very good athletically, and really that's what I excelled in football, basketball, and baseball, and went to Central Michigan University to play football and just go on to play in the NFL, and shattered a knee.
Oh, man.
Yeah, my sophomore year, the last game, I got hit, and it just shattered the knee, and my career was done. And I went, man, what am I going to do?
Exactly.
And so of all things, I wasn't really, I didn't like school, but got to go to school in order to play the sports. So that's why I kind of did it. And then I become a teacher.
Right.
And ended up over by Flint, Michigan, which is kind of on the east side, and was teaching middle school. And I ran into another teacher that was raising whitetail deer. And of course, I grew up on farms, and so I went over and visited him. He says, it's you can make some money at doing this, and a deer's a deer, and that kind of stuck with me. I went, no, the old farmers always hung around, always talked about the genetics. It's always improving, and you match certain things up. And so when he said that to me, it kind of clicked, and I went, oh, I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally, I think it's 32 years ago, bought my first deer from that guy. My dad then fenced in our old farm that I grew up on. He raised deer for a number of years, and it was all about the genetics. And just by sheer luck, God's grace, I ended up with two of the biggest 6x6 typicals in the entire industry.
Yeah.
Then, and so it catapulted me to the very top of the industry without me knowing what I was doing. I mean, it's just the truth of it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I kind of going back to your school story. I grew up playing baseball on it. I fished. I tried to get into football. I was always doing something. Baseball was kind of my first love, though, as far as athletics, and stuck with that through high school. And I wanted to go play on into college, and I never got any offers. I thought, that kind of really knocked me off my, stool there. And I went down to a small school, Ferrum College, down near Virginia Tech. And they had a baseball program, so I was going to go meet the coach and just see if I could walk on. It was a D3 school. I was going to try out, and I got down there, Doug, and I started talking to, obviously we were going kind of looking at the different programs they had and stuff like that. And I think we ended up seeing some of the campus police there. We talked to them, and, I think we got into the conversation about hunting. He said, well, you can actually check your firearms in at the police station and you can hunt all the public land around here and just check them out. I was like, well, not only is this the only college that accepted me, but I'm coming. So, I was never a school person either, but baseball kind of just fell off then. And that's really when, I've hunted all my life, but that's really when I just kind of really got into it, picked it up, and that's what actually sent me to school, was because I got to hunt down there.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I went to Central strictly because our deer camp that my dad and I, I grew up going hunting with him.
Right.
In fact, I would always get in trouble in high school because I'd take the first 2, 3 days off. Well, that was the start of basketball season.
Right.
And man, I got penalized. I had to run so many suicides, I was puking. But it was worth just hunting with my dad.
Right.
And so that's really the farming background. Sports I just fell in love with and was fortunately good at. But the hunting was instilled by my dad. So when I could put the farming, the deer, and all that together, I mean, that was just an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, living the dream, really, the whitetail dream.
Yeah, and then with our youngest daughter, Heather, was born, I actually took a year and a half off and said, can I make this a living?
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely knew I could, so I never went back to school. And,
yeah. No, that's interesting. I think when now you're kind of seeing the YouTube channels, you're seeing obviously podcasts and stuff. And I think that now people are really kind of trying to chase that passion, that desire. And it's really neat seeing how, even though as then he didn't have like the YouTube and stuff like we do now, just how much it meant to you to want to, you had this calling. I'm sure you felt this calling, and then you followed it. And obviously, it's where it is now. So, I mean, you had to have a lot of faith in that and trust that it was going to go the right way.
Well, yes, I did, because I've always said, if you work hard enough and you really learn what you're trying to do well, you cannot fail. Mm-hmm. Now, with that being said, you can, because if you don't have God in the mix, Chad, when you look at everything that's happened to me up to where I'm in today, it has not been because of my physical prowess, my intellect. It has been, there's been a problem, a mistake, or something that's been put in front of me. And I went, how do we use that to better it or improve something? Everyone now knows us as the scent company, Conquest Scents. The whole scent thing happened by an accident, literally by a total accident. Actually, I got to give credit to a 15, 16-year-old kid up in Alberta, Canada, who I don't even know who it is, because we were artificial inseminating a group of deer, and he was a neighbor kid, come over and was watching. He goes, does that stuff attract bucks? And we were literally had him in heat, and we were pulling the vaginal secretions out so you could put the straw semen in, just like they do with cattle and all the farming. And I was just getting rid of it. And I said, well, find a jar and I'll put some in it. I don't know, just kind of, you're bothering me, get out of here. Well, he was going out back hunting. He comes back about 40 minutes later, and he's looking at me like, they came right to me. This is weird. I mean, he's white as a ghost. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, the deer, the bucks, they're right there. We went around the barn, and there's 4 bucks that had come 350 yards across an open field.
Unreal.
And the one had the jar in his mouth, and I just looked at it and I went, oh my goodness, this is the best of the best. But to collect it's hard, and you get a little amount, and how do you market it? And
right.
And that was 9 years before we ever came out with the scent company.
Well, it's interesting when you look back, and I think we can kind of go right into the scent side of it, and we can jump to the farming operation after. When you look back on it, I'm sure the progressions are pretty neat. When you were a teacher, and then you kind of had this kind of thing drop right in front of you with your friend that had deer, and you were like, oh, I think I can try that. Well, I'm sure it took some time to get used to it, build your herd, and then it's almost like, okay, God thinks you're ready for the next step, and he lays something right in front of you, and then you progress. And it's just really neat, because during the time that you're building and progressing, I know with the podcast and the things I'm trying to do outside of my main job or the house here, you start feeling like you're just spinning your wheels. Sometimes you're not going anywhere, but that's like the fun of it. But during it, you're like, is this right? Am I doing this right?
Well,
So
are you going to end up in the right place?
exactly.
Because when the wheels are spinning, sometimes you're kind of not following a straight line.
Right.
It was like I said, it was so weird because by the third year, I I had the biggest deer in the industry
Hmm.
and didn't even know how I ended up with it and what to do, other than everyone wanted to buy that genetic line. So it was just making money. But I got to know everyone, and it was a rodeo back then. I mean, you could ship deer anywhere in the country,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden we realized we needed regulations, and then of course CWD came in and really shut the borders. That's what made me really try the scent industry. But
Hmm.
I really made my living building high fence hunting ranches for really rich people. I
Right.
would build them, I get them turnkey, and then hand them over to them. And that was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
But
that's one of my questions, Doug, because I was wondering when I'm kind of looking at the whole industry or your business, at least the farming operation from a cattle standpoint, because I have not ever been on a deer farm, but cattle, I know when you starting to get into the registered Angus and whatever it is, they're a cow calf program, whatever it is, they're getting a product. They're either keeping the heifers to breed and keep, calling out the older heifers and keep the herd going. They're taking their bulls, their best genetic bulls, they're passing to different farms. So was the real driver behind the deer farming, was that for genetics for big deer for these high fence ranches? Is that what that
it,
was? I mean, is that what drove the business?
it's exactly what you just said. So we have our breeding program that we try to improve the genetics. Now there's two types of genetics you improve. You improve the body size, you improve the antler growth.
Mhm.
The bucks are all going to end up at hunting ranches at some point or farms used as breeder bucks
Mhm.
to improve their genetics. But at the end of the day, every deer is going to be consumed one way or the other, whether it's a doe or a buck. At the end of its cycle, we hope it gets consumed for food. Same with cattle. So the way you describe the cattle, the Black Angus industry, is exactly what the deer industry goes through. We've just over all these 30 some years have really improved the science of it.
Mhm.
There's less people in it, but we're doing so much more with it and making so much more money. And we've learned that you have to understand, you send your cattle to a slaughter facility and they
Mhm.
get processed. We
Right.
send ours to a ranch, they get harvested, and then they get processed. It's
Right.
the same thing, it's just a different place that we're sending them to.
Mhm. Mhm.
The difference also with ours is, like the ranches I deal with, about 40% of the bucks I ship there die of natural causes. They never get harvested.
400s.
They, well, 400, actually lack of hunters because they're
Yeah.
private ranches. And so these deer live a wonderful life.
Mhm.
It just, they die in a fight, or they die of pneumonia, or they just die of old age.
Right.
Um, and a lot of people don't understand how that works.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you
No, that's
described it very, very well.
yeah, that's interesting. You know, when you're looking at genetics, I'm gonna kind of dig back to my genetic classes there at Ferrum. Um, obviously you're looking for, does most of the genetics come from the doe? Are you looking for a good doe? And then you're also looking for characters from a buck, and that's how you're pairing these. I mean, I've seen videos of you studying your genetics. Do they have the EPDs like just like you can read just like for cattle and stuff?
Yep. They,
Okay.
they, they do, not to the extent that cattle has, but
Right.
over the last probably 15 years, that's what we've been working on. But when I look at it, I look at 70% of the doe nor, normally is producing the offspring, the genetic pass through,
Hmm. Hmm.
and 30% is the buck. Now, within that, one out of every 10 bucks seems to be that 70 or 80 percenter.
Hmm.
Uh, the buck kind of right here behind me that you can see, that's
Hmm.
son of the gun. He set the standard through the entire US, through all of Canada. It didn't matter who you bred him to, he produced 200 to 220 inch typical offspring. It just didn't matter who you bred him to. He was so prolific that he just set his own standard. That's rare.
Hmm.
Normally, what you're saying now, let me use a perfect example. Conquest that we named the company after.
Right.
He was 172-inch net 1-year-old. Think about that. Record, Boone Crockett record book, net 1-year-old, 172 inches. He was phenomenal.
Unreal.
Not one single good son came out of him. Zero, not one. They were all average to mediocre, nothing really over 200, maybe that 180. And I was totally disappointed because here's this phenomenal, and he was phenomenal.
Right.
Here's what we found out a couple of years later. Every single breeder buck that we had on our farm for 4 straight years come out of a Conquest daughter. He threw all of his genetics through his daughters, nothing through his sons.
Unreal.
So again, it just goes to back up exactly what you're saying, that how powerful the females can be.
Right.
And then when you really match up a fluent buck, you get this explosion. And that's really how we ended up with Bruce. We ended up with Kaiser. God gave me this ability to look at deer and understand them in a way that most people can't.
Right.
I don't understand why. It's hard to explain to people, but I can literally look at deer and go, here's what they're going to do. Just wait. And they're like, how'd you know? It's just by the way they look and by the way they stand and by the way I don't know. I understand it.
Right.
And the same thing with the genetics. I can look at a deer and go, okay, we can clean that up, or I can enhance that. And that's the combination we need to use. And I'm trying to teach that to Nate, the new farm manager.
Yeah.
And he's catching on good, but some of it's just naturally built in.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Do you think any of this information that you're finding has anything to do with, like, over the last, I'd say 10 years, I think more to the general public, you see a lot more people doing habitat improvement or, supplement feeding, out of season nutrition. Do you think that really this is kind of catching on outside of the deer farming world to help improve herds? Like, obviously, if you pour into these does that are on your farm, I would think that it would help, get them through having their offspring, lactating, and then, through the winter time when there's not a whole lot of food. I mean, do you think that's where this kind of stuff comes from?
What's interesting is the number of hunters has slowly declined for the last number of years, other than the COVID year. It really spiked up and now it's kind of gone back to norm. Right. And a lot of people said, hey, I haven't hunted in years, but I got all the time, and now they're busy again with work.
Right.
But you hit on something that's very perfect. The guys that are hunting are smarter now than they've ever been, and they're managing their herds in their hunting area better than they ever have, which is more than most of the DNR agencies do, because they don't have the manpower or the ability to do it. It's not their fault. They just can't. It's more than they can handle.
Right.
Let's put it that way. So you've got hunters putting in food plots, and they're putting in winter habitat. They're putting in, the biggest thing, they're putting in year-round food sources.
365 mindset. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the healthier a deer becomes, the more they can produce their genetic potential in antler growth. And I say potential because now if you're in an area where the maximum potential of antler growth is 150, please don't look to grow a 200. It's not going to happen. We simply on this farm maximize the antler potential. Again, when I can put in a 250-inch potential buck, I mean, that's the genetic makeup, and he's matched up to another 250-inch on the female side, pretty easy to grow a 250, 260-inch buck.
Right.
You don't have that in the wild, but what you can do is you can make them healthier, you can make them stronger. The other thing that hunters have realized is that their culling process, I've been on this for a number of years, cull the older does, let the better genetic younger ones come up and become dominant, and you multiply your genetics twice as fast. Therefore, you multiply your antler growth twice as fast.
And they won't pick you out as easy like them old does.
No, the dominant does, you have to understand, their daughters will take their place.
Right.
And all of those things are learned traits, like blowing is a learned trait. We don't have any deer that blow on our farm. And people look and go, well, they're all quiet. I'll say, oh yeah, because if you blow, you die. It's a learned
Right.
trait. And I am not going to allow that trait to be learned because then everybody gets uptight when we have to work with them.
Right. And
So,
yeah, I'm sure when you're working these deer, just like cattle, you're worried about stressing the animal out. So I'm sure that intensifies it when deer start alerting each other, and it becomes an out of control situation than what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Now let me understand, in the spring, right now we're having fawns born. Okay, if I go into a pen and all of a sudden I hear a mom blowing, I'm not going to go kill her because
Right.
she's trying to protect that fawn. I get that. But come fall, when there's no fawns, and all of a sudden I'm driving down a runway and somebody goes, I'm looking over there going, you better shut your mouth.
You just messed up.
We're ending this thing because
Yeah.
we eat a lot of venison.
Yeah. So you blow, you go is in the deer farming industry too.
There you go. That's it. At least on this farm.
No, that's interesting. I was watching some videos over the last week, just, leading up to our recording session tonight. One of the most interesting things that I saw, it was a 2.5-year-old deer, and I can't remember the name of him, and you're going to tell me in just a second, but he was a spike year 1, and then he was like 170 inches year 2. And so many people are like, once a spike, always a spike. So can we go into that a little bit and, what you found out about that deer?
So here's what happens. I'm trying to think of the name of that deer because we've had 3 of them. I've had 3 spikes as yearlings turn out to be breeder bucks on this farm. 2 of them over 200-inch typicals.
Yeah.
So here's what happens is a lot of times you will have a fawn that is late born. And so it puts all of its energy to stay alive through that first winter into its body. Now, when it comes to the first year of growing antler, it still has to continue growing the body. And about by the end of the summer, it catches up with the body. And so it's grown very little antler.
Got you.
But the advantage is now it's got maximum potential on its body. So when it goes into 2, all it has to do is grow antler.
Yeah.
And lots of times they blow right past maybe a nice 140-inch 10.1-year-old. Because that deer grew its body, grew its antler, and did a little of both. Well, now it's got to grow its body. And so they kind of slow down a little bit. We can never tell what a buck is going to be truly until 3 years old. I mean,
so do you leave everything at the farm until that age, and then after that you start falling or dispersing?
I used to, and reluctantly I don't. The reason being is I have 2 10-year contracts with 2 ranches, and that is to supply the bucks. We stock them with does, and now we're supplying the bucks. They acclimate better into the ranches. Now, understand the one ranch is 1,500 acres, the other one's 1,600 acres. So these are big pieces of property. They acclimate much better at 2.5 than they do 3.5. Here's the reason: at 2.5, when they go in there, they're not going to get into the breeding cycle with the 4 or 5, 6-year-old bucks.
Right.
They're just going to go eat. They're going to find their little niche. They're going to keep their nose clean. When you bring them in at 3.5, that's when they go, okay, we got to get into this system, but we don't know where we're at. We don't know the habitat. We don't know our competition. And now the competition sometimes gains up 2 or 3 on 1, and we lose a lot of them. So I've changed my policy on this of moving them out at 2.5. So it's making it harder to pick our certain breeder bucks.
Right.
Now, this year we had a 150-inch 1-year-old. Okay, pretty simple to pick. Okay, and he's going out wide, and he's pretty cool. Actually, he's on our live cam, our deer cam, 24/7 deer cam.
Yeah, I have to check that out.
Yeah, so you can watch him there.
Yeah.
But the other 3 or 4 breeder bucks, we've kind of got to look at the 2.5s and just do a guess on who's the best, that they'll stay the best.
Right. Yeah. And so when you're talking about your breeder bucks, how many does do you put in with them at a certain time, or do you move them from pen to pen, and then how long do you keep these bucks around until it's kind of time to move on? Greener pastures or wherever you take them.
Yeah, to the ranches. It's each one is kind of individual.
Mhm.
It depends on what he's producing, how he's producing, what his temperament is, and
Man, I didn't think that was gonna happen. He's throttled too, son. God, thank you.
I can't believe this.
do I have a sale for that buck? Now, once a breeder buck is chosen, he goes into a breed pen. He never gets moved out of that pen until we're completely done with him. We pull the does out and we'll put new does in with him to change the genetic combinations between the two. We also artificially inseminate, as you know. So,
Yeah.
like the buck in pen one, that's with the trail cam, we put 2 does in with him that he bred naturally, but then I think we put another 13 or 14 does in that we AI'd that he'll have to catch the ones that don't catch.
Yeah.
Which is about 30%.
Yeah. Now, I mean, so when you're AIing, so you're collecting the semen yourself there. So can you do that year round, or is it still it's only in that time period, breeding period?
Right. There,
Interesting.
2 best times are literally end of October, very 1st of November, just before the rut comes in.
Yeah.
Because they're let's just say fully loaded. They're wound up and ready to go.
Right.
But probably the best, cleanest quality is end of December into January, when everybody's been bred. They're still full, but they've calmed down a little bit. That's probably the best quality that we can get. But then you got to use it the following year.
Gotcha. So, and then you're selling that to other farms too, or is that just stay at your place?
We sell some of it to other farms. A lot of it stays at our place. We're now breeding for genetic resistance to CWD. And so we're finding certain bucks that have more resistance to catching CWD. So we're trying to get that all bred in. So we're doing a balancing act here, Chad. We're looking at antler growth, but we're also looking at the GEBV numbers on resistance and going, we got to kind of take the resistance, but we still want to keep the look.
Right.
And maybe it's not the highest score, but it's a good look with more resistance, just so we can stay in business.
Well, so I guess that's your next platform you're at, right? That's the next hurdle you're trying to figure out, just never ending revolving door. But, I mean, that's interesting because I don't think, obviously, the whitetail farming industry really isn't that old as far as, this type of information coming through. So, I mean, it seems like you're really helping out the future of this whitetail deer and whitetail farming. That's pretty neat.
Well, we are. What people don't understand, a lot of hunters don't understand, is that the deer farming industry, if there is a way of stopping or eliminating CWD, it's going to come from the farming industry, because we have controlled barriers. We have controlled situations that we can run all the studies and all the tests. And what's really neat is that we now know, like scrapies in sheep, they just bred it out of existence with certain markers that they knew these sheep can't catch scrapies. Well, same thing at deer. There's certain deer that we now know aren't going to catch CWD for at least 7 to 10 years. So if we can have all of those type of deer and we harvest those deer within the 7 to 10 years, CWD doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if it's in the soil.
Right.
And so Dr. Haley's markers, Dr. Seabury's markers, by working those combinations, we've been able to do that. And so I think I know in Michigan, I would dare to bet within probably the next 5 to 8 years, everyone's probably going to be markered out where we're not really worrying about CWD.
That's interesting.
Just worry about it in the wild deer herd.
Right.
And here's what's cool. the DNR agencies can test the wild deer, and they'll find pockets of susceptibility and resistance, let the resistance multiply and grow, remove the susceptibility, and what's going to happen when you create a vacuum, an open area, all those resistant ones move into the area. So it'll take longer, but I think we can literally breed CWD out of being a problem.
Yeah, no, that never even thought about it. And that's a lot of work. But I mean, when we're thinking about, obviously stewardship is a big part of our, I feel like, existence here on Earth. And you're thinking about the funds that go into these DNR, DWR, game commissions. I mean, these projects are something that we're going to have to look at for sustainability for these resources going forward, because with hunter numbers dropping, and we're seeing it in Northern Virginia, we're getting kind of urban sprawl. We're getting people relocating from the city to the country, but they don't like the country way of life or hunting, So, I mean, you're losing hunters in these areas outside of the cities. What is that doing? That's making deer population increase. Well, the only way that there's a balancing act without hunters is through a disease situation. And we've seen it creep in from West Virginia, a couple counties. We are under a CWD watch now. First week of rifle season, we got to take our deer. Weekend of rifle season, we got to take our deer and check them in and let the game wardens, we donate them and they check them and stuff. But we've had to deal with it for the past 5 years in some of these northern counties because of the situation. And it's sad that it's happening, because you don't ever want to see deer suffer. I enjoy seeing the large herds we have. It makes for an interesting sit in the afternoons, in the mornings. Obviously my dad being a full-time farmer with beans and corn, he doesn't love them walking across a bean field, but it makes it good for me when I'm sitting in the tree stand. But I hope that that's something that can be passed along to the public sector, where that might be something to work into these management plans that the states are doing. So that's interesting. I didn't know anything about that. Yeah.
And understand too is, as long as the history of mankind has been here, like you said, we have been put in charge of overseeing and managing everything on this planet by God. And if we don't do it right, he's going to, through the natural ways, balance things out and set them right. And it's always been done through disease.
Right.
One way or the other. It was always said it's going to wipe out all the deer herds. Once it gets in there, it's going to transfer over to humans. It's all these scare tactics. Well, that creates money for agencies. But the reality is none of that's happened.
Right.
None of that's happened. In fact, very few deer have died from CWD because they're dying of a car accident. They're dying of a bullet, a predator. The biggest thing that we're having trouble with in Michigan is that we're losing wintering habitat. And when you change the temperature by 4 degrees for a deer, that's death come spring. And so when you get rid of all these tines and stuff like that in the winter, where they get into, and the thermals are 4 degrees higher, so they're not working on their fat stores, they survive and make it through. Well, they're not doing that anymore. So there's this amazing balancing act that God's going to set it straight.
Oh yeah.
Through nature, and it's normally by disease. And so that's what we're seeing. The strongest is still going to survive.
Right.
It's just a transition period.
No, yeah. That's interesting. And, kind of staying on the genetics real quick, because I just find that really interesting. And then I want to get into obviously the scent company and your products. I was watching one of your videos, and you said no matter how it works out, and I think you looked at like a 10-year period, you usually end up with a 50-50 doe and buck ratio, 1 to 2%, I think it was. Did you not think that as you were going along, and then you look back over your past 10 years or however many years, and that's how you found out?
Yeah, it actually was kind of amazing, because some years I had 80% buck fawns. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, you have a year where you have 80% doe fawns. And when you're trying to sell hunt bucks to hunting ranches, and all seeing up with 20% of your fawns are only bucks, you're going,
right.
Payday's not working well here. And so I went back and we started looking at all the numbers, and we're like, how amazing is nature that it balances itself out. Now, we can AI with all male semen or all female semen now, which we never used to be able to do.
Really? That's
Oh yeah, sexing technologies can actually, you can ship them the semen and they'll separate it male and female because each sperm cell is a different size. And so they'll let one drop through the hole and the other one can't. And it's like 99.4% accurate.
That's unreal.
Oh, it's the science is unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's the same for the cattle situation. I mean, we just have a commercial herd that, my dad has a herd bull, and whatever gets bred gets bred. He's more into the, row crops and the hay and stuff like that. But it's interesting. It's so interesting, the technology, how it's come so far in such little time. I mean, well, you've been 30 years now.
I think 32 years right now. Yeah. So yeah, figure 30 years. It's gone from the rodeo Wild West to this high tech. In fact, everyone compares it to the horse racing industry, where it's
I was going to compare it to the cell phone.
yeah, exactly.
To be honest with you.
Yep. Yeah. But
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it was interesting to see that. And so when you understand that, you can build a business plan accordingly, knowing if you're going to do natural or just generic AI, it's going to be pretty accurate. So
yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, Doug, I'd love to get into the more of the scent products. I know you have an awesome lineup. I've always used the Evercalm stick. I like the wax stick. I use the aerosol can as well. Depending on what store I drop in, usually Cabela seems to carry more of the aerosol. Some up where I'm at, so I have to go to Bass Pro. I know they're the same thing, but for some reason they ship differently. I don't know what happens. But I probably 4 years ago is when I first used that wax stick. Me and my buddy both bought some, and we were hunting the same farm, and I was like, let's just see what it does. I mean, I've had a hard time, to be honest with you, really believing in some of these scent things, because you'd use them, deer blow. I'm like, I mean, I wash my clothes, I take a shower, if a deer gets downwind, it's going to get downwind of me. I don't care what I'm using, it's going to blow. And 4 years ago, it looked like we graffitied our tree stands with it, because we went all the way up everything. And, I don't know if that's the preferred way to use it, but it was unreal. I'm telling you, it was unreal, the results that we had with that wax stick. We had deer coming up and smelling the ladder. And I'm like, wind blowing right at them. I mean, I killed all these deer with wind not exactly right, but it was because I'm confident it's because of the wax stick Evercalm that I was using. And these were year after year after year after year, those 4 years. And it was interesting. So I'd love to hear more about it. I know I watched a little bit of video about how it kind of came about, and I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So you heard about my worker being really mad at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really what it was is we had to run 90 something deer through the facility, and it was actually the farmhand and myself. And normally it takes 3 people, and we were down to 2. And literally he comes to work that morning. He goes, listen, let's get this done. I want to get out early. It's going to be a really good night out. And this is out back, free range, outside the fence. And I went, we got 2 of us, let's get cranking. Of course, things don't go right, and get some deer that cause problems. But he literally had physically held on to every single one of those deer while I gave him the shots, took all the DNA samples. I mean, it was a process. So he had the hair, the poop, the spit, the sweat. I mean, everything that a deer could produce, he had on him. But he also had grease. He had diesel fuel on his work clothes, because they were the work clothes. So we get done, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes before dark. Too late really to go out.
Yeah.
He just grabbed his bow out of the office, hopped on a 4-wheeler and went to take off. I said, you're going to change your hunting gear? He's like, I don't have time. It doesn't matter. Won't see anything anyway. Just kind of mad at me.
Down the dumps.
And I went, okay. Work comes first. That's a farmer, right?
Right.
20 minutes later, he calls me on his phone, and I'm thinking, oh, he fell out of a tree stand or something cool happened. He got one, and I'm like, hey, everything okay? He's like, yeah, I got deer everywhere. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean? Well, normally we see 4 to maybe 6 deer.
Mm-hmm.
He had like 12 to 14. And we've never seen that many deer out there. And he goes, I have stood up, I have sat down, I'm talking to you on the phone. They look up at me, they smell, and they go back to chasing each other. I just, without even thinking, I said, Curtis, you stink like a herd of deer. And I went, oh my gosh. I looked at Karen and I went, that's it. That's the smell we have to figure out how to collect. It's everything from a deer.
Yeah.
And it's multiple deer put together. And then if you can take fawns and you can take bucks and you can take does and blend that, then we had to figure out what the blend needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That attracted all deer of all ages. And so that was the making of deer herd in a bottle, which, okay, it's liquid because it's the urine, but we took the hair and all the stuff and let it soak and saturate, and then we filtered everything out. And the wax formula was kind of interesting because I'm grilling burgers on the grill. Karen lights a candle. We're going to eat on the back deck. So I'm sitting there waiting, and it starts to sprinkle, and a raindrop would hit the melted wax, and a bead of wax would pop out on the table. Well, me being bored, I squish it with my finger. And about the third one, a little thing of water squirts out the side. And I kind of looked at that, and I did another one. And what it was is the wax was wrapping around the raindrop. And when I squished it, the raindrop squirted out. And I went, we have to take our liquid and encapsulate it in wax. It's a natural holder. There's no smell. It can't go bad. It just evaporates out of it. So I walked in the house. I went, we're going to put our urine in a wax formula. And she looked at me and laughed, goes, oh, really? She says, and you're going to put it in what? I said, I don't know yet, but look at this. And I showed her, and she goes, okay.
Makes sense, but okay.
But this is how my mind works.
Right.
So I get up the next morning, we're getting ready, in the bathroom, and I go to get my deodorant, and I stopped halfway through, and I went, we're putting it in this, a deodorant container. And she looked at me and she goes, where are you going to get those from? I said, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. And literally, that's how the whole thing come about.
That's interesting. Yeah,
So,
I tell you, you must be a praying man, because I can tell you, you've had more signs. It just seems like it's right there. But luckily, you're open enough to understand the sign. A lot of people miss it.
there's the thing. I'm aware, and my dad taught me this. He says, always look and see as much as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Not only physically see, mentally see,
Mm-hmm.
because everything up close you'll automatically see, but it's the stuff out there that you don't always see.
Right.
And it always stuck with me. And so all these little problems, it was just one thing put together, and think about it, Chad, when we first started that wax formula, we were the biggest joke in the industry.
Oh, I'm sure.
For 4 years, everyone just laughed like, right, what a gimmick. Oh, hurt.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the 5th year, we had people coming up going, oh my gosh, this stuff's amazing. I've shot the biggest bucks I've ever seen. I never knew they were there. I'm not telling any of my friends. And we're like, no, don't do that.
No, please tell everybody.
Yeah, we need you to
Share it on Facebook.
No, I'm not telling them. They're all wondering how I shot this monster buck. And now it's kind of snowballed,
Right.
Literally, this fall's 20 years. So
That's unreal. Yeah. So, can we just talk about your product lineup? So you have the EverCalm, but you also use it. You have different scents in the wax and aerosol or the liquid form as well, right?
Right. So we started with actually VS1, which is our estrus scent. So we created a new category. That's the one that you collect the vaginal secretions, the urine, mix the two together. So that created a whole new category.
Mm-hmm.
Then we came out with Deer Herd in a Bottle, which was the liquid formula. And when we moved it into the wax formula, that's when it became EverCalm, because it was the first ever calming scent. So again, we created a whole new category in the scent industry, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then of course, running buck is a natural one. Now we use younger bucks. That way all bucks feel that they can chase that new buck in the area out. If you look at Michigan, most of the bucks in Michigan are younger than 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what was it? 87% of all the bucks shot last year were 1.5 in Michigan. It's pretty bad, but it's just reality.
Yeah.
So we still want those hunters to be successful, and that yearling buck feels like he can push another yearling buck out.
Right.
You take it to your area or take it to Kansas, let me tell you, those big dominant bucks, oh, they definitely coming in to push that buck out. And so it works everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We've now gone into dog training scents. We've got bear scents.
Well, I was definitely looking at the bear scent. I'm going on my first bear hunt in Manitoba in September.
Okay.
And I saw it when I was, obviously I get the Evercalm every year.
Right.
Obviously I was doing some studying for tonight and I saw that. I was like, after I talked to Doug, I'm going to get some of that and take it to Canada with me.
Yep.
So,
one of the cool things we also came out with a few years ago, I don't know how many, 3-4 years, the Scentfire unit, which
Mhm.
is the first vaping unit. So it actually, we've been able to take the scent, get it into an oil formula with no smell. And so it heats very quickly and actually vapes out. And you can use that by remote. So a hunter can actually fill the air with scent as much as he wants or as little as he wants from the tree stand up to 40 yards away. So that created a whole new category. And now this year, we're actually coming out with what we call thermopads. And this is really going to reinvent the whole industry because thermopads are VS1, are Evercalm and Running Buck, but you can slide them into butane heated scent dispensing devices, and they get heated. Once everything else freezes, these still emit scent. Yeah, so we're actually coming out with we're designing our own unit.
Yeah.
But it heats it once you get into freezing temperatures, which once you got there is you're on your own. It doesn't work. I mean,
Right.
it works very little.
Mhm.
Well, this not only works a little, it goes a lot. So,
I'm gonna have to add one to my pack this year.
oh man, it's a lot of us tried them a year ago, and a lot of our TV hosts, and they're like, Doug, you just hit a grand slam with this thing. I went, well, it's got to work. It's the same.
Yeah. Right.
It's just being heated and pushed out in other temperatures, but now they're using it all season long, and it's actually more attractive because it's been warmed.
Mhm.
So it's like, oh my gosh, something happened again that we never even expected. So
That's awesome. Well, I guess from your teaching background and from all this that you're doing now is why they call you the deer professor. Is that right?
I got nicknamed that by Alan Warren, Keith Warren's twin brother. And I looked at him and he said, all the other names are taken. Dr. Deers is taken. Mr. Whitetail by Larry Wizoon's taken. He says, so we'll just call you the deer professor. I'm like, I can't stand that. And it stuck.
That's usually how it works. The name you don't like usually sticks with you.
I'm okay with it now, but it was kind of like at the beginning, like, what?
Yeah.
I'm a deer farmer.
Yeah.
I love being in my grubs. This is my daily wear, but I love educating.
Mhm.
People that want to learn and want to know. I don't know everything. The deer still are teaching me so many things, but what I have learned from them, I want hunters to know because they become better hunters.
Mhm.
And if they're better hunters, they're more successful. Man, that's what we're here for.
Right.
Let's make other people more successful and happy. So
Yeah. And one other thing I was thinking about just now, if you kind of get rid of the CWD scare within the deer farming community, do you think other states would start being open to allowing deer farms? I mean, is there any new, like Virginia, we can't have them,
right,
but I know in Pennsylvania, I think you can.
right.
You know, from a farming background, even before we've talked, I always thought it'd be a really interesting thing to do because we have the property and growing up around cattle and stuff, I just love it, and obviously deer, but we just can't do it here. So do you know anything behind that, like why it can't be? Or
Well, like your state has been very adamant, even before CWD, that all whitetail deer should be owned by the public and controlled by the DNR agency, the wildlife agency.
Mhm.
It's the old standard. we're very fortunate in Michigan that the association, UDFOM, United Deer Farmers of Michigan, which I'm currently again president,
Mm-hmm.
we started that actually 30 years ago in my backyard. It's changed names a number of times. Um, we actually got deer and elk all cervidae in the agricultural livestock law as livestock. And
Yeah.
so we're not wildlife. And that's the difficulty is in a lot of states, they still look at it as whether it's privately owned or natural, it's all wildlife. And it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, but if you look at what you're doing, what you're talking about, I'm sure other deer farms across the country are doing it. The stuff that you can learn from these deer farms and the care that you take, it can, I mean, we're in the business of taking care of our resource. So why not use that and have something, a facility like this in your, or several facilities like this in your home state to learn from that? I don't.
You are absolutely right in what you're saying.
Mhm.
The problem is you got to understand we're a threat and we're number one competitor for hunters for those agencies.
Yeah.
Again, I use Michigan. Every year we have more hunters hunting high fence hunting facilities because we've learned how to build them properly.
Mhm.
We've made mistakes. The deer industry's made mistakes. We've actually built facilities, put so many deer in there that's not a hunt.
Right.
And so it's called canned hunting. It's a harvest. You're just gonna, well, pick your buck out and kill it.
Shooting fish in a barrel.
Well, right. And that was a big mistake on our part. We had to go back and say, okay, listen, based on the number of acres, based on the density of the habitat, this is how many deer we should naturally hold in there. So it matches what you would see on the outside. But when you see the animals, the quality of antler growth is much, much better.
Right.
And as we've gone back to that, a lot of hunters have gone, wow, it's safe. It's economical now because prices have come down. I mean, think about it. 20 years ago, well, let's go 25 years ago. If you had a 200-inch whitetail, you're at the top of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now they're growing 600-inch non-typicals. Our farm, let's just take our farm. I mean, back then, if I had a 200-inch, I was top of the industry. Now I've got to have 240 to 260 typical gross frame in order to be up in the upper echelon. And that doesn't mean you're at the top. You just mean you're in the top 10%.
Right. Right. And I noticed that you kind of also hone in and you continue to talk about your typical genetics. What made you stay in that lane? What made you do that? And do you start seeing those non-typical traits showing up and then you call them?
Yeah, I don't like them. Okay, so let's. It's very interesting because hunters have to understand, and this really relates to the wild deer too, because it's interesting what I'm seeing throughout the country and even in Canada. Typical genetics is a recessive trait. Non-typical genetics is a dominant trait.
Hmm.
So if you're looking, and let's use the Hansen buck, okay? First of all, 3.5-year-old deer, still the world record. 21 years ago?
Yeah.
Every year that goes by, the chance of that buck being beat goes down because everywhere as deer multiply and the genetics get stronger, what moves faster? The non-typical side moves faster than the typical side. What I've been able to do on this farm because of my stubbornness, I just refuse to go to something that doesn't look like a white-tailed deer.
Mm-hmm.
God gave us the deer. This is what it's supposed to look like. Yes, there can be natural non-typicals, and that's fine. But when you genetically throw stuff together to create what I call chaos, Christmas tree deer, I don't think that's good for the look of the deer.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
When somebody looks at the deer in our farm, or they come in here and look at what's behind me or on all the walls, I want them to go, oh my goodness, I saw one kind of like that in my backyard. Now, with that being said, it might have only been a 110-inch deer, but the frame look they can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to be a hunter. They don't have to like hunting. Everybody likes whitetail deer. And if they can
Right.
relate to it, now they have a more of an understanding of me and my farm. And so I've always looked at it from that standpoint that I need to make sure that I'm a steward of making sure all my neighbors and everyone that comes to this farm goes, wow, your deer are beautiful. They look like whitetail deer.
Yeah. Oh, that's
It's
awesome.
very important. And our industry's kind of hurt that and damaged that to some extent.
Yeah. And do you think that's just more or less because of demand from hunters? They, is that something that they look for when they go? I mean,
Well, it was twofold. The hunting industry, there was a number of hunters that wanted score. I don't care what it looks like. Give me the biggest score. I want the world record. Well, the easiest way to get that world record is in a non-typical setting.
Right.
And so the industry said, hey, we can oblige with that. We'll just start growing. And it went crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they literally grew a 500-inch yearling a couple of years ago. Now, it didn't look like a whitetail deer, but it had 500 inches of antler.
Like a red stag out there on a deer body.
Exactly. It couldn't even hold the weight of the antlers up. But it still grew that volume. So genetically, we've learned a lot from doing it as well. But socially, and when you look at it from a standpoint of the people out there in the world looking at us going, what are you doing? So we have to be very careful.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, kind of last question and wrap things up. Have you had to deal with any like poaching situations or anything like that? I mean, you're growing these big deer and people obviously are starting to, as you've grown and progressed in the farming, they've started understanding there's a big deer at this farm down the road. And deer make people do, big deer make people do crazy things.
True. And there has been a lot of that's happened within our industry in different states. One, the fine, if you do that and you're caught, it's 5 years in federal prison and a $20,000 fine minimum.
Yeah.
We have been very blessed. We have not had any problems with poaching.
Yeah.
We have wonderful neighbors. We have a very good understanding of the people in our community of what we do. I think we've also, Karen and I have been good stewards of being a blessing upon to the people in the community. And for that, they watch out for us.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street. Yeah, we get nervous. We check our fences twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day.
Yeah.
When we did the TV show, Chad, that was probably the most nerve-wracking because we didn't know if it was going to be a positive response to the show or if we were going to have, PETA and all these anti-protesters coming and tearing down and cutting our fences, killing our deer.
Yeah.
And so literally Sportsman Channel was nervous too, because they never showed fence and kind of that farming industry, it wasn't hunting. So we only did 1/4, 7 episodes, and it went over so well. They re-aired them a whole nother quarter, which they said we can't do. And they were like, no, we have to do this. And we actually got nominated for a number of awards.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, they're great shows. They're a lot of information. I love watching them.
3 things we wanted it to come out of that. When we lost a couple of our TV shows, and it was a friend of ours that was just with us for a day, and they kind of looked around and go, you got to do a TV show. You can't make this stuff up. We're like, what are you talking about? He goes, is this what you do every day? I said, yeah. So he goes, everyone wants to know this. This is cool. To me, it's something I've done. I just, no big deal. Okay, you got to go dart a 240-inch buck. Okay, go dart. And
I want to come dart one.
Yeah, he's going, that's not normal, Doug. And I'm going, and so that's what brought the TV show about.
Right.
But we really wanted to bring awareness to our faith in God, the small family farms that people are forgetting, and then awareness to the deer industry, that this industry, we're in it because we love the animal that much. Yes, we have to harvest them, and sooner or later they're going to be eaten. But all animals sooner or later normally get eaten. but the care that we put into it to keep them alive and to take care of them and how we collect the scents. And that's done all right here. So what you're
Right.
getting from us is as fresh as you can get.
Yeah.
It's as good as it can get. And if you have a problem, talk to Karen and I mean, we're the ones answering the phone.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I enjoyed watching Conquest 200. I enjoyed, it related so much to how I grew up on the farm and stuff. It wasn't deer, and we didn't tranquilize or tranquilize deer cattle, but same mentality. I mean, you get up every morning, you go do it, you love it, you enjoy it, you're checking fences, you're looking after fawns that might have gotten, abandoned by their mother, or I saw one of your big deer that you had, I guess it was the same deer I was talking about earlier. I think he got pneumonia. We deal with that in the cattle industry. So it was very interesting. Only thing difference is you got like 15-foot fences that, we can't even keep 3 strands of barbed wire up. I don't know how you keep 15-foot.
10 foot. They can't jump 10 foot.
Yeah.
That's our thing we learned. 8 foot, they just jump right over it.
Got to have 2 more feet.
9 foot, they flip over it. 10 foot, we're good.
Yeah. They don't even think about it, then, you think?
No, they really don't. If they try, they can't even come close. It's and it's just, again, it's just a precaution. I don't want my deer in the wild, and I
Right.
sure don't want the wild deer in my farm.
Right.
And it's just a good process both ways. If your cows get out, it's pretty easy to go find them.
Yeah. Somebody's blowing the horn or knocking on the door.
Right. If one of my deer get out, the neighbor just thinks it's one of the wild deer.
Right.
So it's much more difficult. And so there's been guidelines put in place that are there for a reason, and they're good. They really are. It's good farming practices. So.
Yeah. Well, super interesting. And Doug, I really appreciate you joining me tonight. This has been something, ever since I kind of started getting into the podcast, I really wanted to do an episode with you. And it's so awesome that y'all were able to have interest in recording with me tonight. And I appreciate the time.
I love this. In any time, I appreciate it. It's, as you ask me questions, my mind goes through everything, and I have to check myself, and that's part of farming.
Yeah.
So I enjoy this. Again, educating people is wonderful.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And tell your family I said hello, and I hope everybody has a blessed summer. Hopefully y'all go on a little vacation or something. No farmers, it's hard to get away from the farm, but
we have no vacation scheduled right now.
But,
we're already busy with the scent. I mean, the orders are in, so we're very happy about it.
Yeah, well, maybe we can get on and do another one maybe later on towards deer season, or maybe after deer season wraps up, and go down some different rabbit holes. I think we got plenty more we could uncover and pick your brain about.
You give me a call, I'm happy to hop on.
All right, thanks, Doug, and appreciate everybody tuning into the Marshield Outdoors Podcast, and also continue watching out for the Faithful Outdoorsman series segment with my brother. We're going to continue to put that out each week. But we appreciate all the support. Until next time, we'll see you in the woods.